In this episode, we continue third-party risk by looking at the agreements that define expectations between organizations. When a company uses vendors, partners, suppliers, cloud providers, consultants, or contractors, trust should not depend only on friendly conversations or sales promises. The relationship needs written expectations that explain what each side will do, what service level is expected, what information must be protected, what work will be delivered, and what rights the customer keeps if something needs to be reviewed. You will see terms such as Service Level Agreement, SLA, Service Level Objective, SLO, Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, Memorandum of Agreement, MOA, Nondisclosure Agreement, NDA, Master Service Agreement, MSA, Statement of Work, SOW, and Right-to-audit. These agreements help turn third-party relationships into something measurable, enforceable, and easier to manage. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.News in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. The first idea to keep in mind is that agreements reduce uncertainty. A vendor relationship can create risk because another organization may touch your data, support your systems, host your applications, or help deliver a critical service. If expectations are vague, both sides may assume different things. The customer may assume the vendor will respond quickly during an outage, while the vendor may only promise a slower response in its standard support model. The customer may assume sensitive information is encrypted and restricted, while the vendor may handle it under weaker rules unless the contract says otherwise. Agreements help prevent those mismatches by defining responsibilities before there is a dispute, outage, breach, or performance failure. They also help the organization monitor the vendor over time. If you cannot define what good service looks like, it becomes very difficult to prove whether the vendor is meeting expectations. An SLA is one of the most common agreements in vendor management. It defines the service expectations between the provider and the customer. An SLA may describe uptime, response time, recovery expectations, support availability, escalation paths, maintenance windows, reporting duties, and possible remedies if the vendor does not meet the agreement. For example, a cloud service may promise a certain level of availability over a measured period. A help desk provider may promise that critical tickets receive a response within a certain number of hours. The exact numbers will vary by relationship, but the purpose is the same. The SLA makes service performance measurable. In security and operations, that matters because downtime, slow response, and unclear support can become business risks. A service that supports payroll, healthcare, banking, or customer transactions needs expectations that match its importance. An SLO is related to an SLA, but it is not exactly the same thing. An SLO is usually a specific target or objective for a service, such as availability, latency, response time, or error rate. You can think of the SLO as the performance goal, while the SLA is the broader agreement that may include one or more objectives, responsibilities, and consequences. For example, the SLO might say a service should be available for a defined amount of time during a month. The SLA might include that objective along with support terms, reporting requirements, exclusions, and what happens if the vendor misses the target. This distinction can feel subtle at first, but it helps. The SLO describes what performance should look like. The SLA defines the service relationship around those expectations. Monitoring is what makes an SLA or SLO meaningful after the contract is signed. A vendor can promise availability, fast response, or strong performance, but the customer still needs a way to see whether those promises are being met. Monitoring may include service reports, dashboards, ticket records, incident reports, uptime measurements, customer complaints, scheduled reviews, and security notifications. It can also include periodic meetings where the customer and vendor review performance trends. Monitoring should not be treated as a hostile activity. It is part of healthy vendor management. Both sides benefit when problems are visible early because small issues can be corrected before they become serious failures. If performance drops slowly over time, monitoring gives the customer evidence. Without monitoring, The organization may not realize there is a problem until users are already affected. An MOU is usually used to document a shared understanding between parties. It may be less formal than a detailed contract, depending on the setting, but it still records important expectations. Organizations may use an MOU when they want to cooperate, share responsibilities, coordinate services, or describe a relationship without necessarily creating every detail of a purchase contract. For example, two public sector organizations might use an MOU to explain how they will share information or support each other during certain operations. A business partnership might use it to outline cooperation before a more detailed agreement is created. From a security perspective, an MOU can help define responsibilities, data handling expectations, communication channels, and boundaries. The important point is that an MOU captures a mutual understanding so that assumptions are not left completely unwritten. An MOA is similar to an MOU, but it is often more specific about commitments, responsibilities, and agreed actions. The exact legal meaning can vary by organization and environment, so do not get stuck thinking there is one universal difference that applies everywhere. For Security Plus, focus on the practical idea. An MOU often records an understanding, while an MOA often records a more defined agreement about what the parties will do. An MOA may describe who provides resources, who performs certain tasks, how coordination happens, and what deliverables or responsibilities are expected. In a security setting, this can matter when organizations share services, coordinate incident response, exchange information, or rely on each other for operational support. The MOA helps make cooperation more concrete and reduces confusion about who is responsible for which part of the relationship. An NDA is focused on confidentiality. It is used when one party needs to share sensitive information with another party and wants legal protection around how that information is used and disclosed. A vendor may need access to technical diagrams, business plans, customer records, security findings, source code, pricing information, or incident details. An NDA helps define what information is considered confidential, how it must be protected, who may receive it, how long the obligation lasts, and what happens if the information is misused. An NDA does not replace technical controls. You still need access restrictions, logging, encryption, and sound data handling practices. But it adds a formal confidentiality obligation to the relationship. It also reminds both sides that sensitive information shared during business work is not free to repeat, sell, post, or reuse. An MSA is a broader agreement that sets the general terms for the relationship between the customer and vendor. It often acts as the foundation for future work. Instead of negotiating the same legal and business terms every time a new project begins, the organizations agree on a master set of terms once. The MSA may cover payment terms, liability, confidentiality, intellectual property, security expectations, privacy responsibilities, dispute handling, termination rights, insurance, audit rights, and general obligations. Then individual projects can be added later through separate documents, often using an SOW. The MSA is useful because it creates a consistent framework. In third-party risk, it can also ensure that important security and privacy requirements apply across multiple projects, not only one small engagement. It is one of the main documents that shapes the long-term vendor relationship. An SOW describes the specific work to be performed. If the MSA is the broad relationship framework, the SOW is the project-level detail. It may define deliverables, timelines, milestones, roles, acceptance criteria, pricing, assumptions, dependencies, and responsibilities. For example, a vendor hired to perform a security assessment might have an SOW that describes the systems included, the type of assessment, reporting expectations, schedule, and deliverables. A software development vendor might have an SOW that defines what features will be built, how progress will be reviewed, and what the finished work must include. The SOW matters because vague work creates conflict. If the customer expects one outcome and the vendor priced a smaller effort, both sides can become frustrated. A clear SOW helps align expectations before the work begins. Right-to-audit is a contract clause or agreement term that allows the customer to review, assess, or verify certain vendor practices. This can be very important when the vendor handles sensitive information, supports critical operations, or must meet regulatory requirements. A right-to-audit clause may allow the customer to inspect records, request evidence, review controls, evaluate compliance reports, or use an independent assessor. The exact scope should be clearly defined because vendors also need to protect their own systems and other customers. Right-to-audit does not mean the customer can wander freely through every vendor environment whenever it wants. It means the contract preserves a defined way to verify that the vendor is meeting important obligations. Without this right, the customer may have limited ability to confirm whether promised controls actually exist. These agreements also support accountability during incidents. If a vendor suffers a breach, outage, or service failure, the customer needs to know what the vendor must report, how quickly notification must happen, what details must be shared, and who coordinates the response. The SLA may address service recovery and support. The MSA may include security and notification obligations. The NDA may protect sensitive incident information exchanged during investigation. The SOW may define which systems or services are in scope for vendor support. Right-to-audit may help the customer request evidence after a serious issue. When these documents are aligned, the organization has a clearer path during pressure. When they are missing or contradictory, the incident can become harder to manage because the parties may argue about responsibilities while the clock is already running. A common mistake is treating contracts as something only legal or procurement teams need to understand. You do not need to become a lawyer for the Security Plus exam, but you should recognize how agreements affect security operations. If security requirements are not included before signing, it may be difficult to add them later. If monitoring requirements are vague, the vendor may provide reports that do not help the customer manage risk. If audit rights are missing, the customer may have to rely only on trust. If the SOW does not define scope clearly, a security test, implementation project, or support engagement may miss important systems. Security teams should work with business, legal, privacy, procurement, and technical stakeholders so that agreements reflect real risk. Good vendor management is a team activity, not a paperwork handoff. For the exam, connect each agreement to its main purpose. An SLA defines service expectations and often includes performance commitments and remedies. An SLO defines a specific measurable performance target. An MOU records a shared understanding between parties. An MOA often documents more specific responsibilities and agreed actions. An NDA protects confidential information shared between parties. An MSA sets broad terms for the ongoing vendor relationship. An SOW defines the specific work, deliverables, and scope for a project or engagement. Right-to-audit gives the customer a defined ability to verify important vendor obligations. Monitoring keeps the relationship alive after signing because it checks whether expectations are being met. The exam may describe a situation and ask which agreement best fits the need, so focus on the job each document performs. The main idea to carry forward is that third-party agreements turn trust into defined expectations. A vendor may be capable, friendly, and well-intentioned, but the organization still needs clear language about service levels, confidentiality, responsibilities, scope, monitoring, and verification. SLA and SLO terms help define performance. MOU and MOA documents help structure cooperation. NDA terms protect sensitive information. MSA documents establish the wider relationship. SOW documents define the actual work to be done. Right-to-audit protects the organization's ability to verify that important promises are being kept. These agreements do not remove third-party risk, but they make it easier to manage. For Security Plus SY0801, remember that strong vendor relationships are built on clarity, monitoring, and accountability, not assumptions alone.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.